I would like to start with a bold statement Seyi made recently, where he was like, he said, if Figma seeks to endure into the future as a product design tool, you will need to get more technical or less, you will need to get more technical or less easier to use. And this means shading users, like cutting like a bunch of like existing users, and also their products that might help with manage the shock. So I think first for me, the core dilemma you see that forces this shedding users trade-off. Like, what would you say that core dilemma is?
Sorry, come again?
So I'm saying for like regarding what I said. So the core dilemma that you see that forces this shedding users trade-off. Like, what would you say? What would you say that is?
Based on the statement I made, I think I should start from there, right?
Yeah.
I can start from there. So we have seen over the years the rise of the template structured design, and these things got popular because they not only work, but they actually power results, and that's quite fine. I mean, today I already saw an example of an instance where there is already a structure to converting landing pages. Like, this landing page can sell you anything. Just follow the structure. And we saw the explosion of the template-led design. And it kind of coincided with the rise of building AI products and, and stuff like that. And then I made a statement about Figma getting more complex. At the time I made that statement, what I saw from them was that the crop of users that got them to where they are today, the IPO, launching on New York Stock Exchange and the likes, and probably the users that will get them to where they want to be. And that's coming from somebody who is a designer and also somebody who is who's an enthusiast about tools of all types. I mean, across all fields, 3D, brand design, product design, motion graphics, and the likes. And what I saw was that, more often, much more than ever, there's always been a subset of designers that, want more from their work, either by building it out or adding more value, I would call it value-added skill sets, to just, prop up what they have. And seeing how they've been, what they've been doing, all of the acquisitions they've been making, they also are kind of aware of that. And they're making, different acquisitions just to put that in place. And my reason for saying that is, the field of designers, product design is changing a lot. And people are building now. Designers can get ideas from 0 to 100 within just little time. And what that meant was that the core design tool itself will now have to adjust to those changes in realities, right? So what that means is that if Figma is the core tool that designers would, pick as theirs, they would also have to change with the times. But I also added a caveat to that, which is it's happening at a time when we aren't really sure about what these new AI workflows are. And it's also evident in the number of people they've been able to, transition into the workflow. Now, ask how many percentage. I mean, Figma has these statistics about only 1/3 of our users are designers. That kind of seems like a skewed stat, right? Because if most people that would open an account are coming to see what the designer is doing, so basically your core users are designers, if you would agree with me, right? So, how many of those 1/3 are actually following up and moving on with the MCP integrations with, building with Figma, Make, and all of these new tools? We also don't know how much MCPs themselves will last into the future. So, apart from the fact that they would also have to grow, the field is changing, right? Designers are building. The tool would have to change as well. The big question here is that how much of that change will be powered by AI? Definitely, I also mentioned something this week, which is that the way I see it, generative AI is, the final form of AI for designers will probably be more powerful algorithms and less about generating items, because when you want to create, it has to come from a source, and we've seen so far that there's been a foot dragging from creatives being accepting of that of those generative workflows. Especially if you go into the core creative spaces, like people who are the people who actually create, like 3D artists and stuff. Yeah, I'm in those circles, and I see how I don't want to say antagonistic because it has some merit to it, but they've not really been accepting of it. But if you flip the other side of it, which means that if you offer them tools that provide powerful algorithms, tools that answer some questions for them. Like if you're a 3D artist and something can automatically give you a topology of your model, you are more likely to accept that, or something can unwrap your model. Some of the other changes that Figma made, the more creative ones actually got more responses, got more positive responses so far than the other one. So the field is changing, and there is a limit to how much we know of how much of this change is going to be powered by generative AI. Let me say that because AI has always existed in products, and I think sometimes we may forget, sometimes we may not even realize that AI has been part of products. Some things like background removal, snap to grid, what do you call them? The blur algorithms. Some of these multiply functions, they are all forms of intelligence bundled into products. So I hope I was able to answer that, or if I went to...
Oh, yeah. I mean, to a great extent. And you said something which is actually quite right, where we're in the space where things are evolving pretty fast. So which brings me to my second question, which would be, so for this future you envision, what do you think will be the profile of the product designer that uses Figma in this current state, or what do you envision would be the future of that kind of designer?
I've always been of the opinion that designers should push to production, and there's very little to what I can say here, but I'm going to be backing up my statement with action. Come very soon, but the kind of future I see design becoming is the kind of future where designers can actually push to production, match to master, send out put a PR request, a pull request, These are things that are currently being done by front-end engineers, mobile engineers. I kind of feel like there's no reason why a typo error should be left at the behest of a front-end engineer. Some of these things are typically naturally designed functions, and with the rise of AI becoming more powerful, we will see situations where designers themselves will be, in charge of the UI code base, right? And whatever features, whatever ways that humans will consume entertainment in the future, because don't forget, now I'm not talking about, I didn't mention enterprise software because those ones, those products they move slower to changes than, means of entertainment. You don't talk about Twitter, you scroll for entertainment, talk about games and stuff like that. Okay, let's say a bit of fintech products. Some of this, no matter how, depending on how people consume entertainment in the future, we'll see a situation where designers themselves are in charge of the UI and also making changes, pushing updates. When you see a new UI in the future, it's probably going to be a designer behind that. And engineers will have to focus on front-end engineers. Basically, I was talking to somebody this week, which was a front-end engineer. Also, and I was telling him that in the future, you shouldn't see the designers being able to edit your code as a problem. You should, I consider you a front-end engineer, and you should be an engineer at heart because you should be able to outline frameworks. Somebody sat down and said Swift UI is going to be declarative, which means that as I make the change on the button color, I should see it like this. It never used to be like that, right? Some of those frameworks, like some React frameworks like Expo, actually also made it easy to push one UI across web, mobile, Android, iOS and mobile and web, right? So we are seeing situations where the fields are changing, right? And I'm also expecting that in the future, designers will be the ones in charge of UI, at least be in charge of UI, not just a handful of designers, trying out MCP, trying out building with Cloud Code, trying out building with Vercel. We are looking at situations where designers themselves, in your job description, part of your deliverables will be the UI part, while the engineers will focus on plugging in data, plugging in APIs, and plugging in AI algorithms in the future.
I know you also spoke about how design tools need to get more complex and technical. So it's interesting how you are predicting the future and you're actually actively building that into your current workspace as well. And I also know you mentioned diffusion of 3D into your work process. So how's your design reality in that space?
This is what I'll say, right? I think there is, right now, I'm not somebody who likes the way the narrative is being spun, right? Like I said before while I was speaking, I said that, intelligence, basically, software is basically intelligence bundled together, intelligence made tangible. Right from the point when I interacted with Adobe Illustrator a very long time ago, I discovered that these things are actually very intelligent tools, right? What makes the magic wand on Photoshop know where to select and where to leave out? Those are actually powerful algorithms, and they were actually built by people before the AI wave, right? And, I have tried to, in the current realities right now, there are a lot of things I can do with AI. There are a lot of things I can, do with AI. For example, I work with 3D, I work with UIs. Basically, first of all, today, as it stands today, with little experience, you can get a product, you can get an idea in your mind. Maybe I want to design this watch. You can get this idea, get specifications, whether through GPT or through cloud, on what the sizing of this watch should be, how many millimeters this should be, even if you don't have any knowledge about these things. It's going to tell you how much size, what's the average size of a typical finger, a typical pinky finger. Or I want to design the watch. What's the typical length for a strap? For example, I finished a project where it's a wearable, and it was easy to just, look up what the average size of a regular wrist is going to be. So, how many millimeters how long should this strap be, and things like that. Those are non-generative ways that you can, use AI. You can also use, even with physical design, ask the model, what materials are more prone to damage, what materials are more prone to scratches, and why should we use them? What's the cost implication of using plastic on your design, and compared to using iron? What are the kind of 3D printers we would have to get? Or if you want to print out this prototype, what kind of filament we would have to get? Those are things that they are basically domain knowledge changes that I don't even need to use, any generative. And I have not even spoken about generating anything yet. These are just being able to have conversation with a more knowledgeable partner, with caveat, of course, because you have to check what it says. But being able to talk to these things and, tell them, how do I go about these things? And apart from that, you can get your design from Figma, from Blender. Even for Figma, that's fine. You can sketch it in Figma, take it to the AI and suggest, possible changes. If I design something and I want to have something 3D, I can take a screenshot of that and, send that to whichever model I use and ask, what are the disadvantages of having this curve like this? Because obviously, certain curves will cause certain damages on some products. We have had situations where people's smart rings, are swollen and stuff like that. You can always check those things beforehand. And so these are even ways before talking about, I want to generate normal maps. And those are also 3D terms. I want to generate normal maps. And if you work with UI too, you can also always discuss a lot of these things. What are the things, If you want to design, if you have a product now, you have a fintech product, and you want to launch in a new country, for example, you also can start with using AI to research what are the common, what's common with this part of the world. If I want to design for the UAE, for example, my design has to be from the right to the left. What are the things I need to put in mind before designing some of these UIs? Or I want to design in French-speaking countries. What are the fonts that I need to stay away from? Because these fonts have fewer glyphs. Because these fonts have more glyphs. Those are like non-generative ways that I have used AI. So even if you are not for the generative part, you don't want AI, spitting out stuff for you because it feels lifeless or it feels this one. You can always, experiment and try things with having more technical conversations, looking for words. You want to present to your clients, you can have means of, communicating in languages that, sound professional and they explain it and you're not just guessing your way into getting people to give you, to sign you on. So those are like examples of ways I've implemented that into my flow.
Oh, okay. So you spoke about like cultural nuances, I think, which is very interesting because it kind of like speeds up maybe things like you're expanding into like a new sector, maybe a new country, for example, and like it speeds up your research process, which is interesting. And also brings me to something you had discussed earlier where you talked about like how you can speed up like component changes, where you talked about something in Swift, for example, and it goes across both different devices. And this brings me to my question about what you think about the future of design systems. Like how we have it today is like you have like, these different frameworks and tools for managing design systems where like a design systems person that is solely managing that, like everything has to do with working with the tokens, the variants, like everything end to end. So with this current space we're in where like AI is pretty moving fast, how do you see AI like getting into our work process for like a design system point? How do you see how that transitions with our Figma to like maybe a MCP, for example?
Okay. I would like to ask you first, do you think those processes, managing design systems, do you consider them to be manual tasks?
Yeah, to be honest, to a great extent, a lot of them are. Even with things like where you have tools like zero height and stuff, you still have to do a lot of like manual tasks that can be automated.
Okay. In that case, yes, those are like low-hanging fruits that AI can, take charge of. Or you want to change this color token, you want to, edit this thing. I actually consider them very manual tasks too, like you rightly said. They are manual tasks, and these tasks shouldn't even exist. And maybe later on, they wouldn't exist because there will be more powerful models that will be able to handle these things. Like I said, you wouldn't necessarily need to hand over your creative process and your, some of the juicy part, which is, generating things, through your mind. Even if the AI can do it, the process, the process of even, using your own hand, to craft these things is also something enjoyable, right? So maybe AI would, probably be a good agent to take away a lot of these complex parts. Or you want to rename items, because, for example, you could sit on a project now where you need, particular naming conventions, right? For example, Swift UI uses camel case, and if in any situation in the future we can actually transcend, because, for example, sorry to bring this more technical nuances up, but Swift UI is also being rumored, or there are plans for Swift UI to make its way to Android, and what that means is that you'll be able to build native interfaces for Android with Swift UI. If we get to those situations where teams are actually, thinking about, should we do cross-platform, should we do native approaches, it's going to be a very good thing to have models that can handle some of these transitions, some of the heavy lifting, some of the manual tasks, some of the manual part of this work.
Okay, and I guess one important question is, do you have like a proposed workflow of how this works from like Figma, for example, for your design system to like, how like that proposed workflow will work with like infusing with AI?
Okay, so there's currently Figma Make, right? For me, the technology field is very fast, it moves very fast, and there are some pieces that I don't mind missing out on first. I always like certain technologies to develop to without them points. For example, when Figma started getting popular, a lot of teams had to move from Sketch, right, or Adobe XD, and before you can make that change, those are like teamwork changes that you don't just jump into, right? And I would also like to mention to you the form factor for building some of these things. The chat interface, from the way I see it here, is not optimal for visual design work. It's optimal for changes like, more text heavy, but when it comes to items that are visual heavy, things that need visual lifting, you are more likely, we would need to find a different way to allow designers and visual artists consume AI. So right now, Figma Make is one of the ways. By combining Figma variables and certain naming conventions, there's a doc that Cloud, also generated for me to see, how certain naming conventions should work for Figma MCP to pick this up properly, and what are the guidelines. Those are examples. So right now, how it's done is first, I have to ensure that my Figma variables now are named properly, my components are named properly, button / maybe large, or you see text / large / title, all of those naming conventions, I always ensure they're in place. Secondly, I use auto layout a lot. I know auto layout gets a lot of flack, right? But I believe that was one of Figma's most powerful inventions. Not the feature itself, it's always been in existence, but the ability to onboard so many people into the box model, allow people to understand what the box model was like, and I use auto layout a lot. Also, using components and variables a lot. Whether you use string components, Boolean variants and the likes. Then when you combine all of these things, it's possible you can pass your design system to Figma MCP, and it can build out, again, not the UI, but build out a system, a design system for you. Not just dumping it for it, or build out the UI, but building out a design system where your devs can now start picking from, right? It's going to be easier because the way I would, when I interacted with Swift, the way I would typically do these things is you would have to build, so let's say you have a watch, or you have a phone. Okay, let's say this mic. Oh, I'll build out this part first, and then I'll keep this as a component, and I'll build out this top part as a component, not just building everything together. So when you pass all of your systems to Figma using Figma MCP using that, you are able to generate code-ready components that your devs can use. Again, a lot of these processes are not foolproof yet. There is a lot of things that could go wrong, and that's why, apart from leaning heavily into it, I just allowed myself to see how the field plays out. Of course, because I'm also an interested party in these flows. I also like to just sit back and see what people are doing. How people interact with these things. How many people are even building with these things. When they build, what are the results looks like. You see what they said about Lovable, and when they try to say, oh, this is how a Lovable website looks. I actually don't see that as a point. Why Lovable websites are like that is because the crop of all the set of designers, the set of people that are willing to surrender their work to a machine to build, are not, the people that would really care about every single detail. They are the kind of people that would, okay, it works, we'll let it go, right? They are not, the people who actually care about every single detail of, there are a lot of them, a lot of this design, they care about in very small parts. They are always going to be very, very reluctant, surrendering their work to AI for build. So it's not necessarily about these tools. A lot of things can go wrong with new technology. That's why, for now, you can always watch out in the system, look at what the ecosystem is saying, and not necessarily rush yourself into doing anything. The field is very fast, and things change very fast, and give yourself the grace to see how these things are going to develop. Give yourself the grace to see which ones are going to fail, because definitely there are a lot of them that are going to fail, and it doesn't mean the technology is bad. Sometimes we might even be living, very fast. Some of this technology might actually be years ahead, and years later we'll see that, oh, this is what they were trying to do. So those are like the ways I incorporate partly, and also stay by the sidelines to see which ones are coming in, so I can also see how much. Because I love testing a lot. I love testing new technology. I love seeing how they build it, how these things compile. And I love how they come together in the bigger picture. All right. So before that, I want to ask you, with all of this, all of these things happening, and Figma, MCP, VO, being able to build UIs, I want to ask you: do you think we are in a post-UI world? Are we in a post-interface world? What do you see happening, and what can you tell us about the current space?
Do I think we're in a post-interface world?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like, of course, like we're in a space where like what we see today as like visual design is probably going to pretty much extend into our like physical space. It's going to do things like spatial design. It's going to evolve a lot. So a lot of things are going to change. Like, and I think how I like to think about these things sometimes is like, this is not totally related, but like I don't know if anyone, like if you ever watched Black Mirror at some point, and then I used to watch it. This was like way back in 2016. You see a couple of things happening. And now you're kind of like seeing those things like happening in real time in our world, in our space. And why I'm saying this is because I was highlighting like spatial design. So we started seeing things in bits where, and I guess it will still extend more to that, where like, for example, I could be wearing my glasses and then a message comes in and I don't have to be on my phone, and it can pretty much like render it right in front of me. And I can even watch like full-on films. I can take actions. I can, go through shopping right with my glasses, or like maybe they even create things like contacts where I can, augment with my eyes. And I know I'm going too deep into it, but like I feel like it will pretty much like extend into our physical space. It will evolve a lot more into spatial design, and it's going to. How fast that will happen, I can't really say, but I think things are moving pretty fast. So things that we thought, for example, that in past 5 years that we're not seeing happening, have pretty much happened within 2 years. So definitely we'll be seeing a lot more in that space.
Okay. So what would you say, now we are in this world where we also have to be conscious about these things. Products are, they are changing form and changing mediums. What are the core principles that you think we should incorporate into our work, to build for these mediums?
Yeah, okay, that's an interesting question. And I think, just let me think for a bit. So I think when we are designing like things and we are building products and we have to like infuse AI, there are certain things that we have to factor in. I think one of the first things that instead of treating it as like a normal tool, we kind of like see it as a partner. And when we treat it as a partner, it means that we tend to think of things like when you work with a colleague in an office, for example, or you are a manager, for example. The good thing about it is that you can see like full trails of all their like actions. Like, okay, I'm pushing this PR, I'm doing this. At every point in time, you can always like bounce back to track where something went wrong. And I think this is what we have to infuse also into the design, where we have to like design with the sense that whether I want to use an AI tool, there should be audit trails. And that kind of like builds trust with customers. Because if a customer thinks that this thing can totally automate my task end to end, it's nice, but it's also scary in the sense that I feel like I'm not in control, or if something breaks. But if there are audit trails and you can also see the proper thinking behind certain decisions, it makes you like trust that kind of, it makes you trust the product more. It makes you trust AI and your workflow tool more. I think something else that came to my mind, besides like the audit trails, is like we even see things like, for example, CX tools now in our current space are using AI to like automate like customer responses, where they're answering all these things. And you would see that even in cases where in finance, for example, it's when it comes to certain things like maybe chargebacks or like transaction fails, it would still like nudge like maybe a support agent that, this transaction failed, should I initiate a reversal, rather than just taking out the action on its own. And as much as you say AI is automated from end to end, you see that those kind of things still build trust and reliance, knowing that I still get a sense of like what this AI product is doing, and like in the sense that it works with me, if that makes sense. And that kind of like just builds, it builds trust generally if you put all those into perspective. So I guess, I hope I answered the question there.
Okay. And if you don't mind, I'd like to also follow up with another question, which is like, now with all of these realities, it would seem, like I said too, that roles are changing, right? Roles are changing. Designers are doing designers' work, right? Do you think this is here to stay, or we are just currently in this gray area? We are just currently just experimenting. Do you think there's later in the future we'll get situations where these job descriptions would actually just change, not just for designers but also across the board?
Oh yeah, yes. To be honest, I think very much like we're in the space where roles are definitely changing. I don't think we're going to just remain in that space where like things will be the same. Things are pretty much changing even in the past like just few years when AI like came into the space, and definitely to change. I mean, you see things where like PMs are like able to like do certain tasks faster. Like you can research faster. Designers can, create prototypes faster, and even like from end to end to like from design to like hosting it and like building out like full products. You can see those kind of things. Even though I think they are not really. We are still at a point where we like to experiment with a bunch of tools, but you can see those processes pretty much happening. You can see things where like engineers at some point will be writing codes for what do they call it, for each component, and they're writing unit tests for each of them. And I've had instances where I think that was one of the first impressive things for me was I was not killing myself again with unit tests. I would just like go and review it when the thing writes the unit test for me, and it was pretty impressive. You are seeing those kind of things. So things would definitely not remain the same. I think like the only fear people have, which always comes at every point in time, is where like when there's a disruption, everybody's always afraid that, will I become redundant, will my space be wiped out or whatever? And I don't think it will be. It's more like when we see these things like when we see AI as like a partner as opposed to like a total replacement, we see how we can infuse into our workflow. We as human beings are always bound to evolve. Design, what we do today and call design, like it will still remain the same at the fundamental core of it, where we are creating things that are functional, but it will change in how we work, if that makes sense. Even as engineers, roles will blend, roles will blur. We are seeing like more rising design engineer roles, so things will pretty much change. But at the fundamental core of it, I guess what I'm just saying is we will change in how we work in our day-to-day work. What I'm doing today will definitely evolve. So yeah, I guess yeah.
So now, if I could also add this, if these roles will change, it would also mean we'll get this debate about if it's subjective. If PMs can spin up a quick wireframe, about of certain features, and maybe engineers can also spin up. I'm talking about it now from looking at it from one side and the other. How would you consider subjectivity in this case? Do you think we should, or do you think this features, or do you think this new age, considers design to be subjective, or at the whims of some of these result-driven, what do you call it now? Result-driven angles.
So let me get your question right. You said, do I think design will be subjective in what's? Mm-hmm.
Now, do you think, with all of these changes happening, the PM can, spin up your work? How much of subjectivity would be needed here? How much subjectivity would be needed here? Would we all have to now, rely on the result-driven part of it? Because there's a lot of automation happening, right? And, it kind of can seep into design choices. And, we can, just look at it and say, oh, this button works, or this thing works here. How much of that you think is going to crowd designer subjectivity, being able to make decisions on the fly, on their own?
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying, and I think in the general sense, I think I saw this thing like at some point where we're like, we're in a world where like how fast, like it's getting a lot easier to build things, and the easier it is to build things, the more taste is valued. I don't know if that makes sense. So I feel like at the core of it, creativity is still very important. Even what you're saying now about like PMs being able to do all these things, or like being able to spin off things, already happened before even what they call AI came into place. You would see things where like someone just like goes to Canva, for example, and just says, okay, I've done a mock-up of this. Like it's just that now they're like doing this in different ways. If you get what I'm saying? So it doesn't necessarily mean that, in terms of the subjectivity, it doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't necessarily mean that an entire flow of a designer, for example, is totally cancelled out. It can mean that I can easily prototype something to you and you get a sense of what I'm trying to build. But in the final output, you still want to see like the design flow and like the creative thinking, because you can't also take out that entire knowledge. It's a domain knowledge that you can entirely wipe out.
Here's something I would like to also bring up. I don't want us to consider documentation just, as an afterthought. Sometimes very simple annotations on your file go a long way in describing what a piece of UI does. You don't necessarily need to wait till the end of the project. I think that's where the issues usually stem from. You spent months and months building stuff up, and even before the thing launches, you're already getting tired and just, I mean, at least for me, you get tired and you're looking for, when are we pushing this thing out and when is it launching with all the deadline changes and stuff that, if you can, take the, maybe take the bull by the horn, as you're creating. For example, there are certain things. Let me give you an example. When I was, when we were building like 3.0 and I would write something, I would create something else. On that same Figma page, you write something else, what that system does, why we did this, why we did that. And it kind of helped, not just the developers, but also the PMs working with us, to understand how we were thinking about these things. For example, the Ghana cedis is decimalized, which means that you won't get so many zeros when you're trying to fund an account based in Ghana. But if you want to fund an account based in Nigeria, you'd have more zeros. And for example, and what I meant was that the POs will be longer, right, for Nigerian UIs. What we did was to cut down those UIs and use what in Nigeria we typically mention as 500,000, 500K, 200K. So if you go to the UI now, you will see examples of that there. And a lot of these decisions were documented as we were designing them, right? Now, it's very possible, right? There are AI browsers now that you could do certain works for you and, navigate. I mean, it literally navigates between Figma pages. If you can state out what you are doing, put a note above, let's say put a note above your screen and you get a lot more done than the end of the project. And also don't forget the storytelling part of the work, because you're also trying to tell the story of how you got. I can tell you certain instances, a lot of instances of UI. You can point to me today, open 3.0 and tell me, this is what, this UI, how did you guys come about? I could tell you. For example, the pictures, before, the UIs were heavily reliant on pictures. And if you notice now, the UI has some form of picture stacking thing. Why did we do that? It was stated there. It's stated there in the system, which is that, a lot of these UIs, users can upload any type of pictures. When your UI is image reliant, your images are doing heavy lifting. It can go very wrong because users can upload any kind of pictures. And what we did was to create these image stacks. Those items are there, and we also explained the motion part to it, not just the visual part, also how these things move. When you scroll, what should happen when you scroll? What should happen when you swipe down? A lot of these things are written. It's going to give you more joy doing these things while you're working on the project than when you wait till the end. And then AI can look through all those files if you are willing to allow, some of these agents, look through your design file. If you don't have any, if you don't have any objections to that, they can look through this file, or you yourself can look back at the note you left months ago. That can, rejuvenate you and say, okay, oh wow, look at what I wrote about this thing. Within that time, you would have gained extra context, which would allow you write more about what you've provided. And also, I would like to mention that there's barely any time where you are creating things from scratch. Like, a button is always a button, no matter how many times, you try changing it. And a button does certain jobs. Maybe you craft a different kind of button. Maybe you're designing a game, designing game assets, and there are always, more visual items on them. You can also always explain that, but there are certain UI elements that are always consistent across, and you can always use, more template-y descriptions for those items. But what I would say is that it's very understandable that at the end of the design system, at the end of the process, you get tired and you get exhausted, get worn out. I don't know if that was your case, but I'm talking in terms of my own case. But if I look at my file from yesterday or from 3 years ago, let's say I followed this thing I just mentioned, and I look at some of the things I've written. Maybe I was even playful with what I was writing. Like, I'm leaving myself a memo, which I'll see years later. It's going to be easier for me to say I want to sit down and do documentation than when everything is done. And I've even forgotten majority of the reasons why I took some decisions. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you.